Good morning, all, and thank you for joining us for Trialogue's latest webinar. We have these online forums monthly on the last Thursday of the month. It's 9:30. Thank you to all of those who are already online. We'll just give it a couple of more minutes as more people join the webinar. So thank you very much for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us, participate in what is a really critical topic, and one that is key to our social fabric, economic performance, social well-being, and safety, and how safe we feel in the country that we live in. So thank you very much. Good to see the numbers of people joining there. That's increasing, so thank you very much. As more people join on. Okay, I think it is good for us to kick off and get the proceedings going for today. Good morning, I'm Sheldon Morias. I'm Thought Leadership Manager at Trialogue. So thank you for joining us again. As I'd mentioned, we host these online forums once a month. On the last Thursday of the month, so mark it in your calendars. Today we're exploring a critical topic, as I've mentioned, GBV and how businesses can play their part in curbing and addressing gender-based violence in a society with some of the highest levels of crime in the world. We'll discuss and grapple with how companies can approach their CSI projects in a more strategic and proactive way to better serve their communities and employees. Now, crime against women and children has rocketed to unfathomable levels in South Africa. Daily reports of murders, rapes, brutal attacks, kidnappings, and human trafficking. Just this morning, I read an editorial in Business Day following the release of the Victims of Crime survey, which is conducted by Stats SA annually, or to give us a better sense of how safe people feel in South Africa, what crimes, the nature of the crimes as well. And it really is sobering reading, no matter how many times you encounter it. And in many of these instances, the victims suffer at the hands of intimate partners, relatives, or close friends. So it's not this thing that happens out there or to someone else. Often it's in the spaces we occupy, in our homes, our family circles, our friend circles, at work as well. And what can we do to address that and play our part from a business perspective, and as we work with NPOs as well. Now, I'm looking forward to today's discussion to explore some of the innovative ways Vodacom, other large corporates, NPOs, and other organizations are driving, and what they're doing to drive safety and response programs to help victims of GBV and to prevent attacks on women and children. I just want to say thanks to Vodacom for sponsoring this webinar and continuously supporting thought leadership, CSI in South Africa, and capacity building. We truly appreciate your ongoing support there. And thank you to our panelists, Angela Abrams from the Vodacom Foundation, Dr. Subeda Dango from the National Shelter Movement, Gugu McLaren, Ushe Wokonze from the National Business Initiative. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and taking time to join us this morning. And thanks to you, our audience, for joining us this morning. I really want to thank you for taking your time out and spending it with us. I also want to mention that we've extended the webinar to 90 minutes. So if it's the first time you've joined us since March, and the reason we did that was, after receiving overwhelming feedback from you, our attendees, who wanted to allow for more time to delve into really important topics we deal with each month. And it really has been, great extending it, filling that time, and hearing from you as well. Just a few technical points. There are two ways for you to engage on this call. You're welcome to use the chat function to connect with fellow delegates and share your thoughts on content. You'll see that it's the button entitled chat there. You can use that as well. Then you can also pose questions to myself and the panelists through the session. For that, I'll ask you please to use the Q&A box rather than the chat box. I'll then draw questions from that Q&A box for our panelists to respond to in the discussion section later. So please direct your question to one or two of the panelists, and do try to keep it as succinct as possible for us to get to as many of those questions in that. And then there's a short survey at the end of the session, which will pop up. Please do share your thoughts here so that we can improve these sessions and focus on topics that are really important to you. Now, moving on to our agenda. After my brief introduction, I'll be handing over to each of our three panelists for their opening comments. We'll then dive into the discussion, and our panelists will answer some of your questions from the Q&A box. Each panelist will then give a short closing statement or comment as well. Our first poll will appear on the screen now. This will help us get a sense of the type of organizations you represent, and it'll allow myself and the panelists to tailor our conversation so that it really brings you value out of that. So I'll leave that up for a while as you let us know where you're joining us from. Okay. Okay, that's great to see it coming in there. Great, some votes, I suppose, or indicators on this poll trickling in, so that's great. 60% of you joining us from NPOs, around 10% from big business, small or medium businesses at about 7%, government. Good to see government joining us, a good compliment. There, 6%, consultants at 11%, and academics as well. So thank you very much for letting us know where you're from, and I really am looking forward to a really strong, interesting conversation, and see the chats already going there, so that's great. Hello, Telfa. Hello, Mapaseka. That's great to see you, you guys there. Good morning, Rejoice. That's great to see. Thank you, everyone. I mean, keep that coming in, yeah, let's use that chat functionality, interact with each other, and reminder, just if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box. That's where I will be sharing it. Okay. So I think let me just tell you a bit about Trialogue as we get started on that. I understand we've got a minor problem with our share. Let me just get that there. Gremlins, let me get them out the way. So let me tell you a bit about Trialogue, and then we can get the conversation started and going. So thank you very much. It's good to see some familiar names on the call, and for those who are joining us for the first time, it's great to see you then outside of our regular CSI and nonprofit network. So thank you very much on that one. A special welcome if you're a first timer. Let me tell you a bit about Trialogue briefly, and then we'll get the conversation going. So we're one of a few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business, and we do this through consulting services as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which aims to make CSI in South Africa more effective. And then the two main types of consulting that we do are monitoring and evaluation and CSI strategy development. So when we look on our knowledge sharing platforms. We run our annual conference, the Business and Society Conference, which was held over 2 days in May. If you missed that, you can read all about the keynote addresses at this year's conference, as well as the topics and discussions that came out of that on our Knowledge Hub platform. We also publish the annual Business and Society Handbook, which is currently in production. And we invite you to profile your development work in that publication. It's due to come out on the 3rd of December on Giving Tuesday. So if you'd like to get in touch with us around that, please do. We'd love to hear from you on that. And then returning to the Knowledge Hub, this is an online body of knowledge that unpacks specific topics in the development space and is aimed at strengthening the impact of investment in those areas. And through the Knowledge Hub, corporates can showcase their important and industry-leading social impact work that they do and support. If you're an NPO, we've got the NPO directory, which is a listing in which we aim to, highlight and showcase the NPOs that are out there and give them some exposure in that regard. Now, just a reminder that the write-up and the recording of the webinar will be uploaded to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. If you want to share that, please do. And if you want to go over any of the discussion points from today. Now, let's jump into today's focus, which is gender-based violence. And before we kick off the conversation, just a recap on the current context and where we stand regarding gender-based violence in South Africa. So we've got government that spends around 227 billion rand when it comes to peace and security. This includes defense, it includes police. And when we look at police and the law and courts, which are most applicable to gender-based violence, we've got the police spending there 112 billion rand and the law in courts and prisons at around 51 billion rand. And as we've seen, as developments, often that is not enough. And it isn't, government just doesn't have the capacity to do it all on its own. And this is why it's imperative for us to get involved as corporates, as NPOs, and other organizations as well. Now, South Africa has one of the highest rates of femicide in the world, more than 4 times higher than the global average. And that truly is concerning. So just before we go on to the rest of the social context and sector context, I think it's important for us to put up the second poll to give you some time on that. The question is, considering the high rates of femicide and murder in South Africa, as you've just heard me describe there, what immediate action do you believe businesses should take to contribute to a safer society there? I'll leave that up for a bit as you consider it, and please do vote in that poll there. I see it's up live, and we've got votes coming through, so thank you for that. Okay, thank you. Those votes coming in. So as they come in, I'll just give you a brief indicator. So 31% of you saying that increased funding for local GBV prevention and response programs. 37% of you saying collaborate with NPOs to provide support and resources on that one. 20% saying advocate for stronger government action and policies against GBV, so using the influence of big business there. 11% saying implement comprehensive security and support measures for employees who are victims of GBV. And as I'd mentioned, it doesn't happen out there. It's in our workplaces. It's our employees, it's our colleagues, it's our family members. So thank you very much for those votes there. 37% of you saying collaborate with nonprofits to provide support and resources, and 31% of you saying increase funding for local GBV prevention and response programs. So I think both of those speaking about business and NPOs working together there. So thank you for that. So as we look at, I mean, this, you all know the statistics. It is concerning. It's horrifying. Globally, 1 in 3 women reports being physically or sexually assaulted by an intimate partner, while almost half of all girls report that their first experience was forced. Now, if we have a look at what the state of CSI support for GBV looks like in South Africa, and this falls into 2 categories we found in our annual research into CSI spend that Trialogue does every year. It falls into 2 safety and security programs, which, you know, is around anti-crime campaigns, safety campaigns as well. But we also see it fall into social and community development programs where spending is directed towards victims of violence and abuse. Now, if we look at the safety and security aspect, we've got about 13% of large corporates supporting CSI spend in that regard, with about 1% of that average CSI spend, which is around 11.8 billion, going into safety and security. On social and community development, the numbers and the spend look a lot better there. 74% of companies giving an average of 13% of CSI spend to social and community development. And of that, an average of 6% was directed towards victims of violence and abuse. But due to the scale of the problem that we face, certainly more can be done from both the safety and security aspect, as well as a supporting victims of abuse and violence. So that's where my panelists come in, who work across that spectrum from big business to business corporation, as well as NPOs and supporting of victims of abuse there. So thank you very much to Angela Abrams, Head of CSI at Vodacom Foundation, Gugu McLaren Ushewa-Kunze, Head of Economic Inclusion at the National Business Initiative, and Dr. Zubeida Dango, Head of Executive at the National Shelter Movement there. Angela, let me kick off with you. For your opening question, please describe to us what the Vodacom Foundation's GBV programs and how they fit into the company's larger CSI strategy and overall business strategies and operations, because Vodacom is one of the organizations that has been supporting GBV for quite some time and puts quite a bit of effort and its strategy into it.
Great. Morning, Sheldon, and morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. Thanks, Trialogue, for hosting, I think, this really, really important conversation. Yes, Vodacom has been funding or supporting gender empowerment programs since 2013. As most people know who attends Trialogue, that our focus is essentially on education, but more and more we're starting to work in the gender empowerment space, and more specifically as it pertains to gender-based violence. So Vodacom is a purpose-led organization. I mean, when people think about Vodacom, they think about data, they think about data prices, but essentially at the core of what we do is we want to connect people through our technology for a better future. And so that is the purpose of Vodacom, and that purpose runs throughout the organization, not only the foundation. We have 2 pillars, we call them purpose pillars. That is empowering people and protecting the planet. And so obviously the work that the foundation does falls under the empowering people pillar. For Vodacom, however, the work that we do in the gender-based violence space and in gender empowerment stretches across the organization. So when we look at our gender-based violence programs and our gender empowerment programs, we don't just see it as foundation programs. So we look at it with an holistic approach. We look at how we can support our employees, we look at how we can support and work with our customers, and we look at how we can support and work with our communities. I mean, needless to say, Vodacom obviously makes sure that not only does the work that we do fit in with our business strategy, but also the government strategy. So everyone knows that government's comprehensive strategy is called the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. There are 6 pillars in that, and I'm not going to go into that. But when we work on our strategy, and we do a lot of work with this on our strategies with Trialogue as well, Kathy knows this, we always ensure that the work that we do as an organization aligns with what government is trying to achieve. So we do ensure that the work that we're doing also aligns with the pillars. So in terms of our gender-based violence work, Sheldon, we have quite a few. We've got quite a few programs, and I'm going to run through those because I know we don't have much time for the opening, and we'll probably have a bit more time to discuss. So we have a national footprint. Like I said, our program aligns to the pillars of government, but we also have our own, what we call an ecosystem, and we look at prevention, response, support, and empowerment. And all of this is obviously underpinned by our partnerships because we're not experts in gender. What we do well is technology and communication. So we make sure that we're partnering with experts. And all of this is also underpinned, or most of this is underpinned by our technology. So for our prevention and response strategies, we have a few programs that we run. We've got the Bright Sky mobile app. I'm not sure if many people are aware of that. We launched it in 2021, and this is essentially a free-to-use and free-to-download app that we use to raise awareness. And again, we partnered with Women and Men Against Child Abuse, and we worked very closely with Lisa Vetton. So partnerships for Vodacom is important. Our biggest partner is also the Department of Social Development. So we in 2013, we actually established the Gender-Based Violence Command Center, which is again a toll-free line which victims of violence can call. And when it was launched, it was very important also to note that the statistics that we get from the Gender-Based Violence Command Center can assist. I think it's underutilized when Vodacom was doing the program, because what it can do is it can assist us to be more proactive in terms of how we respond to gender-based violence in our communities. As I mentioned earlier, Vodacom has a very big education program. I think we spoke about it at the Trialogue conference as well. But what we realized when we did our M&E is that obviously you need to take an holistic approach to education. And what we've done in April 2021, we started a little pilot program where we placed psychosocial support workers in schools. We started with 10, and the results were so encouraging that we increased the program. And currently we have 36 psychosocial support professionals based in 25 schools across the country, but servicing 42 schools and reaching more than 35,000 learners. We pledged as Vodacom 10 million Rand to the Gender-Based Violence Response Fund also in 2021. And this essentially is to build Tutuzela care centers across the country. So we launched the first one in Cradock in March, and we'll be launching the second one in Mpumalanga towards the end of the year. And again, this is about allowing victims to safely report gender-based violence, receive immediate medical attention, but also allow them to report it in a space that's safe and that doesn't, I think, expose them to secondary victimization. So I think the point I'm trying to make with these responses is that even though Vodacom is a telco, we realize that when you're fighting gender-based violence, you need a multi-sectoral approach. So we can't, as Vodacom, only be pumping money into technology when that is just one of the elements that will address. We need to make sure that we are doing the psychosocial support in schools. We need to make sure that we're assisting the Department of Justice through the NPA in creating these safe spaces for women and victims of violence to report. So what we learned through our journey as Vodacom is that, one, partnerships are important. Two, a multi-sectoral approach is important. And three, that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So you need to be invested in this journey for the long run. I think as corporates, we like to, we like to quote numbers. We like to say we've done this and we've done, but we've learned with gender-based violence that you sometimes have to go back, tweak, retweak, come back, and maybe make the program a little bit smaller. So it's a journey. And I think we're always humbled as Vodacom that we work with really wonderful organizations. We work with government, we work with the National Shelter Movement, we work with NPOs, we work with schools, and that's the only way, essentially, that we are able to make the impact that we can in the space, in the country. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks for that, Angela. I really like the comment around, being more long-term focused, which is quite a commitment, and brings us away from sort of our short-term metrics that we may have a look at. Gugu, thank you very much for joining us and giving us your time today. Gugu's the head of economic inclusion and the acting head of social transformation at the National Business Initiative. Now, Gugu, what role does the NBI play in relation to fighting gender-based violence, and what do you recommend companies focus on in the fight? I mean, you've done a lot of work around private sector involvement in addressing GBV.
Thank you so much, Sheldon. Good morning, and good morning to everyone joining today. Firstly, to say it's a great honor to be part of this conversation. It's also been great to see the number and the focus on GBV in this Women's Month, but also beyond this Women's Month, noting how urgent and important this issue is. The National Business Initiative is a voluntary membership organization. We have almost 100 member companies from across sectors. And what's great about our NBI membership is that it is voluntary, which means that companies that are part of us are committed to driving social and economic transformation. And we are fortunate to work with a whole host of organizations that are doing very important work, GBV being a critical area of focus for us. And why it's important, I think a number of aspects. One is obviously the impact of GBV, the impact that it has on our society, on our economy, the impact that it has on business. So, when you work with business, you've got to understand that there are different drivers for their focus. But for us, it really is about understanding the broader social environment and context that companies are operating in, and therefore their role being much broader than just myopic on their business. So there are a number of things that companies should be doing and should be looking at. And for us, it is, firstly to say, companies are doing a lot in this space. There's a strong focus on the immediate and the urgent need to provide support for victims of GBV. There is also the longer term, more complex work of the prevention side. And that requires companies to understand what are the causes, what are the underlying reasons for GBV, and to do the work around that. And that's complicated, messy work, but it also is the most important work. So when we engage with companies, we think about their sphere of influence. What can they be doing within the workplace? There are aspects around company culture. So we know that deeply entrenched social norms, deeply entrenched stereotypes, biases, and prejudices, power dynamics are a key element there. So how can companies create equitable, inclusive workplaces that deal with these aspects? How do we ensure that companies have the necessary policies and processes within their organizations to support their employees? noting that GBV isn't something that happens only, in homes, etc., but actually can manifest within the workplace as well. And there's a responsibility around ensuring that that is addressed within the workplace. There's also a very critical role around economic equity and equality as one of the kind of underlying aspects of that causes GBV. So when we think about companies' responsibility, we think about pay equity as an important aspect of the role that companies can play. But there's a lot more. We've mentioned, and you took us through CSI spend and where are companies spending CSI. We know that CSI spend is an important contribution that the private sector makes to supporting organizations, supporting NGOs in the space doing the work, who have been doing the work for a long time, who have the lessons, who have the knowledge of what needs to be done. And that support becomes absolutely important in ensuring that those organizations can continue their work. And also, and one of the things that the NBI does is to ensure that there is a constant understanding and link to national and government priorities. GBV is an issue that requires partnership, it requires collaboration, it requires alignment. And so how do you ensure that the private sector understands that, is aligned in how it supports national priorities? And so Angela mentioned the NSF as a key element of that. The private sector responding to that and supporting that makes for more impact and really is ensuring that we have a multi-sectoral approach. And so our job as NBI is to work with companies along all of those aspects and to support them in understanding their role, in providing spaces for learning, for sharing, for collaboration, and that bridging role with government. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thanks so much, Gugu, on that one. Great to hear what the NBI is doing and seeking to, support businesses along their journey on that one as well. Dr. Dango, you're head of executive of the National Shelter Movement, and you've got an extensive network across all 9 provinces offering support to victims of violence, both offer women and children. What type of support does the National Shelter Movement offer women and children who are victims of gender-based violence?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sheldon and Trialogue, for having us. We're truly honored to be able to present this morning. The National Shelter Movement of South Africa, just to give you a brief introduction, was established in 2008 as a non-profit, non-government organization serving an umbrella body of 99 gender-based violence shelters across South Africa, as you said, in 9 provinces. So all of these shelters affiliate with the National Shelter Movement. The vision of the National Shelter Movement is a society where women and their children are free and safe from gender-based violence, and it's the united voice on sheltering for women survivors of gender-based violence in South Africa. So what we do is that we engage in a number of different initiatives and aspects. Our goals are advocacy and lobbying. So we advocate for reforms, policy changes that safeguard the rights and interests of gender-based violence survivors. We lobby for increased funding, improved resources, and heightened awareness around gender-based violence issues. Because we know that we live in a pretty patriarchal society, and we really need to get people to understand and change their perspectives on gender-based violence. We establish provincial shelter networks. We recognize the power of collaboration. So the NSM fosters provincial shelter network forums to facilitate knowledge sharing, resource pooling, and coordinating responses to GBV crises at the grassroots level. We ensure gender sensitivity because we are committed to ensuring that gender sensitivity is included in all aspects of our service delivery. The NSM champions programs and initiatives that empower survivors, foster resilience, and promote healing from trauma. And this is done from a survivor-centric focus. We also develop capacity of shelter staff, service providers, and gender-based violence workers through training, mentorship, capacity building initiatives nationwide. Through targeted capacity building and mentoring sessions, we invest in the professional growth of shelters, because what we found in South Africa is that there have been many people that have their hearts in the right place, and they want to start shelters or programs for gender-based violence. But the passion alone is not enough. You need to have skilled people who are able to roll out these programs. One of the things that the National Shelter Movement does is we also do mentoring of shelters themselves. And this year at the National Shelter in Indaba, we'll hear from a couple of the shelters that have gone through a year or 2 years of mentoring to share with people what it is they've benefited from or not in being part of that program. We also engage in legislation and respond to the amendments to the different acts, and recently to the domestic violence and other acts. We offer space for mutual support, sharing, and learning experiences. So the NSMSA facilitates a supportive environment where shelter staff and survivors can find solidarity. We exchange insights and address common obstacles. We foster resilience and camaraderie within the shelter community. In 2022, we were part of the engagement with the South Sudanese delegation who visited South Africa in terms of getting a greater understanding of gender-based violence. And more recently, we were involved with the Lesotho government on their exchange visit to South Africa on gender-based violence and femicide. We also conduct research, and the research is there to deepen our understanding of gender-based violence and femicide dynamics, to inform policy decisions and advance evidence-based solutions so that we drive systemic change and empower stakeholders to better address the complexities of gender-based violence. One of the very big studies we were involved in, we partnered with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. The study was entitled Working to Enhance State Responsiveness to Gender-Based Violence. It was a 3-year study, and this shed light on the complexities and costs and the impacts that gender-based violence had on shelters and survivors in South Africa. We've also conducted research on the voices of women in shelters in South Africa to better understand how we can provide excellence in service to the women that we serve. We conduct a series of webinars on a monthly basis. And then the NSM also conducts a national shelter in Indaba. This year in October, on the 16th and 17th, we will be doing our 4th national shelter in Indaba in partnership with the National Department of Social Development and the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And this is an opportunity for shelters nationally to get together, to be able to discuss issues and overcome challenges. We also represent the global network of women's shelters. So this is an international body, and the National Shelter Movement has presented at all 4 of their previous world conferences, and we will also present at the 5th World Conference, which will take place in Australia in 2025. We also then offer an emergency response. During COVID-19, the NSMSA was swiftly mobilized resources and support for shelters that were about to close down. And by allocating funding to these shelters, we managed to keep many of these shelters open. And, you know, this was really very traumatic for the shelter staff and for survivors as well, because there was no way we could say to them that we're shutting our doors and we're not able to help you because funding came late from the department, or that we don't have funding. We've established a 24-hour helpline in recognition of the urgent need for accessible support services for women and children affected by gender-based violence. The difference with this helpline is that we, unlike the command center or the other helpline, the lifeline one, in that we place women in shelters on an urgent need, because we know that women's lives are at stake when they're leaving home. And we believe that shelters save lives. And so this is why this helpline is critical. So shelters affiliated to the National Shelter Movement also offer a range of services. And of course, the services differ because of the resources that the shelters are able to access. So we also offer transitional or second stage housing, which is very limited in South Africa, and there's a great need for it. Psychosocial counseling, legal assistance, economic empowerment, child protection and counseling services, ECD centers, homeschooling centers, job readiness preparation, entrepreneurial programs where possible, prevention work with communities, GBV workshops. We work with the schools and boys and men, and some shelters also do food parcel distributions.
Dr. Dengo, I want to come in there on the point of your point just before this regarding technology and the helpline and the like. I know, Angela, from Vodacom's perspective, because I want to highlight the importance. We often think about GBV support in terms of monetary support and, as you mentioned, shelters, but increasingly technology has become that first line of speaking up. Angela, from Vodacom's perspective, how have you found the integration of technology in addressing GBV? You've obviously got the initiatives such as the GBV Command Center. How has that improved support in addressing GBV?
Okay, thanks, Sheldon, and thanks, Dr. Dango. I think it's always just wonderful to hear about the work that the National Shelter Movement does. So I'm going to start there, Sheldon, because we do actually have a partnership with the National Shelter Movement. And since 2017, we've been in partnership with the National Shelter Movement, where we do ICT training for some of the survivors of violence who are placed in the shelters. And since 2017, we've trained more than 1,800 survivors, and we've worked in 52 shelters across the country. And so what we do in partnership with the movement and with the National Department of Social Development is we go in and we do ICT training. And we do training, around how you can find a job, how you can build your CV, what are the important websites to go on to try and maybe start a business. So it's a 5-day training. I know it's not very long, but what we have learned just by going back to the shelters and having conversations with the managers is that when the women receive the training, they're more inclined to now try to upskill themselves, try to do little courses online. So that's what we do, just in terms of the work that we do with the National Shelter Movement. The other thing that we do in terms of empowering women, and I'm so glad Gugu spoke about it, because it is another important element for Vodacom as well, is we work with Black female farmers. And yes, people will say it's got nothing to do with gender-based violence, but what we do is we do, again, ICT training for them. And many of these farmers have small subsistence farms across the country, very good quality produce that they are unable to sell because they're unfamiliar with technology. And what we've done in the training is very simple training: how to market yourself online, how to set up a little business, how to go onto the DTI's website and get licenses. So that's the sort of, I think, relevant hands-on practical training that we've provided to our Black-owned female farms. And what they've done is, some of the beneficiary stories is that they've now been able to sell their produce. They've been able to reach out to Spar, to Boxer, to those sorts of retailers, and just manage to, I think, empower themselves economically. And I think for Vodacom, that is an important element for us. So yes, we do work on prevention, which as Gugu again said, is quite complicated, and you need a whole lot of different elements to deal with that. But in terms of support and empowerment, we've used our technology, and again, Sheldon, it's a journey, but we have used the technology to provide some level of support to survivors of violence. Even in our ECDs, we work in ECDs across the country. We've upgraded them. We've provided the ECDs with mobile technology, and just by upgrading the ECDs, just by providing by providing technology, by doing employee volunteerism for the practitioners, these owners, which are most of the time female, have been able to access grants from the DSD. They've been able to increase their fees because now the facilities are better. They've been able to access programs that the practitioners can upgrade or upskill the practitioners. So there's a lot that technology can do just in terms of empowering survivors of violence.
Thanks, Angela. And I think that's a great moment for us to, open up into the discussion part of the webinar. So if I can ask my panelists to switch on their cameras and their mics as well, as we go through. A reminder to our attendees, thank you for joining. You can post your questions in the Q&A box. Let's keep them coming. Thank you for your engagement on the chats. If you can have that come through, we can have those questions, and I'll pose them to our panelists as well. As I move to my next question, I'm going to ask Abdullah to post our third poll for you to consider as we begin the discussion as well. How can businesses best integrate GBV prevention and response into their core strategies? I'll leave that up for a bit as you consider those options. And Google, on that note, I'm going to come to you in terms of the challenges that corporates may face in terms of looking at how do they best integrate their GBV efforts into their CSI strategies, and to make them as effective as possible.
Thank you very much, Sheldon. So, I think that, and I'll reflect on what we are seeing with our member companies who are very engaged in this space. You'll find that companies that already have a very deep understanding of their broader social responsibility, their role within society, the role of business in addressing our pressing societal issues, have an understanding, as Angela said, that these things are very much connected. And you've got to think about it not necessarily as one aspect, but also how do these things all fit together, and developing a strategy that speaks to that. So for companies that have a strong educational aspect, that is essential and important when it comes to the prevention of GBV. For companies that have a strong focus on entrepreneurship, supply chain development, etc., again, as Angela has pointed out, that has a strong underlying link to preventing GBV. So if you think about it in that sense, and you have that good, deep understanding of your role, you're able to think about it as a thread throughout all of these interventions, all of these engagements, all of these activities that companies are doing. But on top of that, there's also a need, as I said in the opening, for very urgent and immediate need. And what I think is important to understand and for companies to understand is what already exists in the space. And understanding that there is a lot that has been happening. There are a lot of fantastic organizations doing incredibly meaningful and impactful work that do require support. And how do you then focus efforts on leveraging what exists already? Because you always want to get away from lots of bitty kind of activities, a project here, a project there, when there's an opportunity to really think about where there are impactful organizations doing the work that companies can support. Another thing that has been incredibly useful is, one of the things we did within NBI was to create a working group, which was of our member companies who were in the space to learn from each other and to understand what other companies are doing in that space. And what emerged from that were a lot of very tangible sharings. So you had companies saying, we've got pledges. Can we share the pledges? Can we use your template, even at a practical level like that? To the retail companies saying, we're thinking about, and Woolies has done this, Woolworths has done this work, we're thinking about making Woolworths stores safe spaces. And can we engage other retail companies around, what this means and looks like, and creating almost a collaborative approach in this space. So there's lots of opportunity to do it. I think what's challenging is that companies are faced with a myriad of issues and demands, and that's the reality of it. I think what's been encouraging is to see that GBV has remained a key priority, as it should, for many companies, whereas with other societal issues, they kind of, there's like a flow. If now we're focused on energy, now we're focused on this. So companies, have a lot of different priorities, but I think what's clear has been the focus on GBV. And if anyone attended the private sector symposium earlier this week, and I believe Vodacom was a sponsor and also spoke at this event, clear that there is this ongoing commitment to addressing GBV. And I think that it's needed, and it's also very encouraging to see the private sector come on board with that.
I like what Angela, both you and Gugu have said around the, there's a myriad of needs that we know across South Africa. So, if for any CSI team, it's what do we do, right? And how do we best utilize our resources? But something like GBV is such a pervasive and wicked problem that it has a knock-on impact on a lot of other aspects of life, right? So you mentioned the farmers. We recently did a webinar on female farmers, and one of the things that comes out is something as simple as accessing a bank account due to I would call it financial violence those women experience within their relationships, right? So it's not just physical violence, it's emotional violence, it's this concept of financial violence, the power dynamics within that. And then once you empower them, it has knock-on impacts. They become freer, they raise better children and the like. When it comes to that, Angela, and metrics and managing impactful, because you want to be impactful and not bitty on your CSI. What type of metrics do you measure? I know you mentioned it's a long-term game, but what do you measure? Because there has to be some sense of measurement when it comes to how effective are our programs.
Yeah. Thanks, Sheldon. So yes, Vodacom, I think with the first company that employed a monitoring and evaluation specialist at the beginning of 2019, the end of 2018, in fact, and together with Trialogue, to start helping us measure the impact of our CSI programs. Obviously, not only the gender-based violence ones, but also the education ones. And so the metrics are different for different programs, Sheldon. So what I'm going to speak about, because it's the one we did most recently, was we did a study on our psychosocial support program in schools. And we went into all the schools where we have social workers, and our researcher obviously did focus group discussions. She did interviews with the principals. She spoke to parents. She spoke to learners. So a wide variety of interventions were used to get information. And I think 3 things came out of that study that was I think very important, and again Gugu mentioned it, and Dr. Dango spoke about it, the importance of partnerships. So there is no work in gender, but in this space that can be done alone. So one of the recommendations was that we need to strengthen our partnerships as Vodacom in and around the schools, because schools are community, you know, they're the hub of sometimes of a community. So one of the big things was that we needed to, in order to be successful, we needed to increase and strengthen our partnerships. The second thing that came out was that psychosocial factors impact learners more than we will ever know. It impacts pass rates. It impacts attendance at schools. It impacts dropout rates. And having the social worker at the school was helping, even if it just meant keeping some of the learners at school. It's now also becoming more important to have psychosocial support in schools because of the high teenage pregnancies. And so for us, in that case, Sheldon, the metrics was obviously levels of attendance in schools. Are young people staying are they attending school? You know, it was the number of partnerships that we're having in and around those schools. It was the number of times learners actually came and reported violence. And so that is where prevention work becomes so important. So raising awareness and making it okay for learners to go and speak to a teacher or speak to the social worker. And I think sometimes also the findings, and yes, it's an internal researcher that does the work. And so sometimes people say to us, she can't possibly be objective. She really is, because her findings make us feel uncomfortable. Her findings tell us that Vodacom, you need to change the way you're working. And so I think for us, what we're learning through the M&E is that this is an uncomfortable space. Even when we're doing prevention work, we have webinars, we have conversations. And when we come back and we do focus groups, discussions on how that goes, we understand that as employees of Vodacom, we need to also take responsibility. We need to have difficult conversations. We need to start putting up a mirror and looking at our own, I think, our own actions, our own biases. So I think for us, again, and I keep saying this is a journey for Vodacom. We're not experts here, so we do bring experts in. But what the M&E is showing us is that it's not a linear process. You sometimes have to take 3 steps back and then move forward. You have to undo some things. You have to relearn behaviors, and you have to find new partnerships sometimes, or you have to strengthen old ones. And so, yeah, for Vodacom, it's a journey, albeit sometimes a very uncomfortable one, but we are seeing progress, I think, particularly in the work that we're doing in this space.
Okay. I mean, it's great to hear that collaboration, not only just between, you know, obviously corporates and NPOs, but between corporates themselves, to maximize and leverage, you know, those resources, and, you know, I suppose have them have impact exponentially. Dr. Dango, I want to come to you on the note of staying with the note of measurement and seeing impact. You know, impact from a corporate perspective may not be the same as impact that you or NPOs may be after, and how that then obviously impacts on partnerships. What type of measurement, or how do you know whether your programs are having impact, or the shelters that you support are having impact? What does that look like to you? Dr. Dango, I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
There we go.
We basically encourage M&E in shelters for every single program. And that M&E has to be put in place prior to the program start, so you know exactly what you're doing. I think it's really important for shelters and GBV programs to do this. One of the programs that I know about, which is a school program, which has been existing for a good couple of years, and we followed an M&E, and after that, the program was evaluated. And one of the interesting findings was that the boys responded better than the young women to the program. And the suggestion from there was that you needed to separate them because girls felt much more uncomfortable to talk about their issues, which were maybe much more intimate. So this is just one example of how the M&E can actually operate. But I think you're right, it's absolutely essential. And we do encourage this. Not all shelters are at the level where we'd like them to be. And so one of the topics at the Indaba this year is to look at how do you incorporate M&E into your programs and into your shelters so that everybody can be taken to the next level.
Dr. Dango, I'll stay with you. We've got a question that is posed, a very practical one as well. Just a reminder, please post your questions in the Q&A box. I see some coming through to the comments. I'll pick those up for now, but please post them in the Q&A box, and then I can pose them and have your questions answered as well. So Dr. Dango, it's a very practical one in terms of the helpline, and possibly Angela as well, because you've got the GBV command center, which may, obviously also a helpline as well. Do you go out, the question from Ramadimecha, saying, do you go out to fetch the victims, as most of the time this violence happens during the night? So the question from that very practical one, how do you support those victims in the very first instance, Dr. Dango?
So the victim would be able to call the helpline. There are a number of ways in which they can reach the helpline, or call me back, where the helpline person will call the victim back. And once we know, she goes through an interview with the helpline social worker. Once it's decided that she needs to leave and she wants to go to a shelter, depending on the province she's in, we have a very good partnership with Uber, but Uber operates in 4 provinces. And since COVID, Uber has been transporting abused women to reach shelters or to go to clinics or hospitals. So we would then advise Uber to fetch the woman from a safe point. So this would be discussed firstly with the woman, and also she would be told exactly where she would be taken to, so she knows in advance what to expect. So this works very well in the 4 provinces where Uber exists. This is in Gauteng, KZN, the Western Cape, and the Eastern Cape. However, in the rest of the provinces, we rely on SAPs, and this can be problematic because oftentimes police tell us they don't have a van, and this means that the survivor has to wait, sometimes for many hours. And we're looking at ways to try and deal with this so that we can make that wait much shorter for victims.
Angela, in terms of the command center, how does it work practically from that aspect, in terms of the support victims get at the first instance?
Okay, so Sheldon, the technology that Vodacom established back in 2013 for the Department of Social Development allowed the victim to be geolocated. And so what the counselor would do is, if she hears that the victim is in imminent danger, they would obviously, ask some questions and keep them on the line, and you then get a ping to show where exactly the call is coming from. They would then inform SAPs or a social worker, depending on the time of day, and inform the victim that we could send someone to come and assist you. But it was all down to the technology, Sheldon. The technology allows us to geolocate the physical location of the the victim. I think the other good thing about the technology, if you'll just allow me 30 more seconds, please, Sheldon. The other good thing, and particularly during COVID, we were able to see during lockdown the number of calls that came through, the kind of calls that came through, which provinces had the highest number of calls. What was, I think it was in the Northern Cape, it was mostly physical abuse due to alcohol consumption. And then in the Eastern Cape, there was a lot of intimate violence. So the statistics that the technology allowed us to draw was able to help us, I think, just look at the times of the day that calls would come in, which provinces had the highest number of calls, how much percentage by how much percentage the calls increased. And I think that was the value of the technology that Vodacom had developed around the Gender-Based Violence Command Center. And I don't think that it was utilized enough, but that was really, I think, valuable for us as Vodacom. And I think it's still something that government can utilize moving forward, because it helps us to be a little bit more proactive in terms of the assistance that our victims receive. I think, for instance, things like over the Easter weekend, calls would spike. Over the December holidays, calls would spike. In January, there would be lots of calls from matriculants because they're now stressing about the exam results. And so I think that is the value that technology brings around call centers.
In terms of Google, now coming to you, in terms of the types of collaboration that we see, you'd mentioned it earlier from what you see from the NBI. What are some of the more successful models? You know, I know that we've been focusing on collaboration, for instance. It's one of our themes of this year, and there are various different models, some successful, some not. What have you seen that has actually worked in this space, whether it be between corporates or between corporates, government, and the NPOs?
Thank you, Sheldon. And I think Dr. Dangle gave a great example of collaboration, of partnering with Uber as a means to get victims to a safe place. Imagine building on that, the same safe places from a retail perspective or a hospitality perspective. There's lots of opportunities to think through the very practical needs and the kind of resourcing and infrastructure that, for example, the private sector has that can be used to support the work that is happening. But I think in terms of models and what has worked, I think where we've seen the private sector able to align better is where there's an overarching framework. So in the context of GBV, we have the NSF, which provides a framework. It clearly maps out the key priorities, and it gives sectors, not just the private sector, it gives organizations and stakeholders the framework in which to then design, in which to align, in which to focus their efforts. So moving away from, as I mentioned, that kind of everybody is trying lots of different things, when there's a clear way of working, when there's a clear framework, it ensures that coordination. And I think with these efforts, coordination is critical and important, because then you're able to say, looking at these areas outlined, this is where it makes sense for us to put our efforts. So certainly having that overarching framework and understanding the avenues and the ways of which you can engage with it. And I think also having a very clear vision around what it is we're trying to achieve. And when it comes to the prevention of gender-based violence, that is something that we've seen certainly from many of the companies that engage with. It resonates, and there is there is no competition issues. There's no market issues. There's nothing that prevents companies coming together, working together in order to address this issue. And so we've seen when there is that clear vision and clear goal, it does allow for a more collaborative, open approach to say, we're thinking of this, it aligns with you. Are you willing to come on board to partner with us on it? I think, when it comes to collaboration and partnership in the South African context, I think one of the things that makes it challenging is issues of trust, and that exists across business and government, business and civil society, the ability to speak the same language and be aligned. And as I said, in this space, I think it's less of an issue, but it certainly still requires spaces and facilitation to get to a very meaningful and impactful place, so that you are emphasizing the goal, you are emphasizing the vision, the framework, and getting people on board and building trust, so that you can start seeing partnerships where Uber is on board, for example, or where Woolworths can speak to a Pick and Pay, and there's kind of shared alignment around what they're trying to achieve. So I think that that's kind of the kind of important aspects when you're trying to build strong collaboration and partnerships.
Angela, I want to come back to you. I know you've got another prior engagement, and thank you for staying with us as long as you have this morning. I want to pose Jeanette Mube's question to you firstly, and then you can give us your closing comment as well. You mentioned, incorporating your GBV strategies into your education strategies, for instance. Her question is, how does the Vodacom Foundation work with ECD centers? And I imagine it's obviously on, filtering that GBV work into that aspect.
Okay. Thanks for the question. So the ECD centers is part of what we call our education ecosystem. And I'm going to give an example of Attridgeville, because that's where we have one. So in Attridgeville, we have 2 early childhood development centers that we support. That's very close to a school of excellence that we support, WF in Como. That is very close to a teacher center where we house a youth academy center. And the idea is that we want to give learners access to technology from a very young age. So when they're leaving that ECD, they then are able to go to WF in Como. When they're done with WF in Como and they cannot go to university for probably financial reasons, they'll be able to go to the Youth Academy Center and do a course on IT technical support, which we do with Microsoft and Google. So we support at the moment 27 early childhood development centers in the country. By the end of the financial year, it will be 35. And what we do is we upgrade them. Where there are pit latrines, we decommission those and we put appropriate ablution facilities. In some of our centers, we had to break it down and rebuild it completely. We place technology there, so mobile trolley solutions, which have devices which are already preloaded with educational material and connectivity. And then our employees work with those practitioners on how to use those devices. And the idea is to create, I think, a pleasant learning environment, but also to get the learners familiar with technology, because when they go to school, when they go to university, they are going to have to compete with the children who go to St. John's and St. Stithians, to compete for spaces in universities. So essentially, that's in a nutshell the work that we do with early childhood development centers across the country. But I am happy to have a chat with, is it Jeanette? I mean, you can share my email details, Sheldon. I'm happy to have a conversation with her to give more detail.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. Angela, just your final comment to other corporates, NPOs listening to this discussion.
Yes, I think for us, the final comment is around what lessons Vodacom has learned in working in this space. And I think the one is that partnerships are important. We cannot do this work alone. And so whenever we're doing this work, we look to engage as many partners as we can. And that is NPOs, it's civil society, it's government, it's academics. We worked with the University of Stellenbosch, with UJ, with UCT, and working with other businesses. When we launched and I'm glad Google mentioned retail, because when we launched the Craddock Tutuzela Center in the Eastern Cape, SPAR was there. And SPAR actually on their bags has the NPA details. So we do work with other corporates as well. But that underpins all the work that we do. We know that with this work, we need to take a long-term view. So it sometimes becomes frustrating, because sometimes CEOs want numbers and numbers of people you've trained and numbers, and you don't always see results like that. very quickly in this space. This is a space that's sometimes governed by cultural norms, religion, attitudes, and so it's a journey, and we're learning to embrace that, and we're also learning that there are no quick fixes, and we can only make impactful, meaningful change through sustained efforts, through changing the way we think, and through partnerships. So essentially, I think for us, those are the lessons learned, and yeah, we continue to learn in this space. Sheldon, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Angela, for your insights, and I think the amazing work that Vodacom is doing in this. And I think your practical insight, for CSI managers, leaders to be brave and sometimes, push back against the immediate metrics, because in this regard, as you mentioned, it is a long-term game in this regard. Just before you go, I suppose indicative of Vodacom being a leader in this space. So our final poll was, how can businesses best integrate GBV prevention and response into their core strategies? The number one aspect people voted for was by incorporating GBV considerations into existing CSI activities. And I think, Vodacom, a leader in that space, as you've described to us, how it impacts on education, your farming initiatives on that as well. The other aspect people voted for was through regular training, awareness programs, and support initiatives for employees. And I think for large employers such as Vodacom, the big banks, it's that exponential influencer, by training your employees, as Gugu mentioned, this doesn't happen in isolation out there. Often it's in the workplace, or it affects the workplace. And then, your employees are able to go out and expand on that impact and influence there as well. And then the final one, by creating a dedicated GBV policy and response team, that would be one other aspect of it as well.
So Sheldon, Vodacom does that, and I didn't touch on it, but thanks for bringing the poll up. So in 2019, Vodacom, I think, was one of the first organizations that launched our, we called it the domestic abuse and violence policy, which speaks about how we support victims of violence in our company. And that was around, for instance, giving victims of violence 10 days additional annual leave off, because we know that women need to go to the hospital, or they need to go to the maintenance court, or they need to go to court for whatever reason. So we introduced that, but also together with that, we started really intensifying our education campaigns across the company. So yes, Vodacom has online modules that we do, but coupled with that, we have quarterly webinars where we just start having these conversations. And we've in the past, we've invited Lisa Vetten, we've invited Nomboniso Gaza, we've invited some of our NPOs, Women and Men Against Child Abuse, to come and speak to our employees around, what gender-based violence is, what it looks like, because sometimes we really just think gender-based violence is what we read in the media, when in essence, gender-based violence can be your partner calling you 19 times a day. Really, you're thinking that's love, and that's really him just keeping tabs on you. So it was trying to just raise that awareness, and it was very uncomfortable. There were men who were saying they don't understand why they need to participate in these conversations. And that's why I was saying it's been an uncomfortable journey for Vodacom, but thankfully, we have leaders in the form of Shamil and Sito and Taki, who've really been spearheading this difficult journey for us, and making sure that we are bringing our employees along. So whenever we're doing Mandela Day, or whenever we're doing volunteerism, our employees are there as well, and all our gender partners are there as well. But yes, it started by us having the policy, but having those difficult conversations and just pushing through with the dialogues, with the webinars, with the conversations, and starting to also draw, the intersectionality between gender and poverty and violence, and all of those things. So we do bring it really close to home for our employees as well.
Angela, thank you very much for your time and for those comments. And thank you to Vodacom for sponsoring this really critical conversations. We'd love to hear more, and I'm sure we will, in terms of the work you're doing and with your partners as well. And just before I let you go, how's this for collaboration? You know, in the year of Trialogue's collaboration, we've got Sipamandla from the Transnet Foundation, who's joined the conversation. Thank you very much, Sipamandla, for being with us today. He says, we're busy conceptualizing a GBV support program and would be so keen to engage with the Vodacom Foundation to learn from
Wonderful.
and possibly work together with, if Angela's open, we'll share Angela's details with you. Thank you so much, Sipamandla. I'm sure she'll be very open to that.
Very open. I'm really sorry, Sheldon, that I have to hop off early. But it was wonderful. It was, thank you to the fellow panelists for the insights. And these sessions are always really wonderful for Vodacom because we learn so much from all our partners. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye. I'm going to hop off now. Thanks, Sheldon.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Angela. We'll keep the conversation going until 11 a.m. So do stay with us there. Dr. Dengo, I want to come back to you because you mentioned something when you spoke about the support that victims get and some of the hurdles that they face in the criminal justice system. You know, you mentioned with the police there. We've got a question here from Albina saying, why is it that, and I suppose this is not directed at the panelists, but my question will come in on the back of this. Why is it that rape victims have to wait so long for their results and in the meantime must deal with their perpetrators outside in the communities? Now we know that, you know, issues like this have been raised, failings within the criminal justice system, delays within the criminal justice system. But Dr. Dengo, where my question comes in is, you were part of the presidential summit on GBV, which has ultimately led to the signing of the bill enacting the National Council on GBV and femicide. When it comes to the criminal justice system, you know, what sort of work, or, you know, how confident are you now that we've got this council and it's in law, it incorporates government, civil society, the various arms of the state, the various government departments. How confident are you that, you know, instances like the delays, the question that Albina asks, will be a thing of the past?
So thank you for the question. I think it's a very critical question. Before I go to the Gender-Based Violence Council, what I'd like to say is that I'm not sure if you saw, but there was a public protector's report and the way in which the court system operates, which is really problematic. And secondly, as recently as last week, we were told about how dockets are lost in the court system. Thirdly, if you look at the way rape victims and the information they provide is processed, is hugely problematic. The information doesn't even get to the labs on time. So I think we have a huge problem in terms of processing information, you know, at that level. And everyone's trying to work on this at this point in time. We're hoping for change, but it's not going to happen overnight. Secondly, in terms of your question on the GBV Act for the forum, yes, the president hurriedly passed this bill because this bill the act was supposed to have been passed a long time ago. When we had the second summit on gender-based violence, people in the summit had actually asked the president, why is it that this is still held onto? So people felt that the commitment wasn't there. But subsequent to that, the government was supposed to have gotten in touch and consulted NGOs and NPOs about the clauses that went into this act. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So at this point, as much as the act has been passed, there are a lot of questions that have been unanswered. And this is where I think civil society is really going to take these questions up with the president, firstly. And secondly, I think that there isn't enough in terms of resourcing. This council has to be resourced adequately for it to carry out its functions. So there's nowhere where it's been stated that the council will have X or Y resources. So I think we're actually going to go back to the drawing board.
Okay, yeah, that public protector report, and it's showcased in our slides there as well. I mean, rather, concerning on that score there. Gugu, to come to you, I mean, when we look at how businesses can leverage their influence, to support government efforts, because I think we've all got the same outcome, right? How do businesses get involved? What would be your advice in terms of, using the influence that they may have, lobbying government for the kind of policies that we've just heard Dr. Dango talking about?
Thanks for that, Sheldon. So from an MBA perspective, we always look at creating space between government and business to collaborate, and co-create. And so there are structures that exist to be able to have those kind of engagements and those kinds of dialogues. Of course, from the private sector perspective, there are mandated bodies that are driving this work, BUSA and BLSA as examples of those, who are able to really engage across a wide range of companies, industry bodies, in order to shape the business agenda and engage business in that way. And I know that there is an increasing focus from we call them our sister organizations, BUSA and BLSA, in this space around how can we all be working towards achieving this. And I think there's a lot of room to do that. I do think that business sits with a lot of resources, lots of insight, lots of infrastructure that can be used positively in this way. And on this issue, I think it is about a constructive engagement towards, as you say, that shared goal.
Dr. Dango, coming an interesting point here from Nobs Mawanda, making the point that it's obviously organizations such as yourselves with a national footprint, although you obviously leverage that to drill down into all of the provinces, having quite a good reach. Nobs wants to know how is it that community-based organizations, and I'm thinking especially in your more rural areas where there may not be massive national reach, but these small community-based organizations play a critical role. How are they able to access the support that is out there from organizations either such as yourselves or from corporates if they are in far-flung parts of the country?
Thanks, Sheldon, for the question. I think what we do as the National Shelter Movement is that we have a presence of a provincial representative in each of the provinces, and the provincial representative is in touch with community-based organizations, so that if something comes up or if they're needing additional help, we will always try and intervene, reach out, bring in other sources, or refer them as well. So sometimes we're not the right people to be answering their questions, and at other times we bring in other organizations that might be able to work alongside us to either upskill the organization or to understand what their needs are before we can intervene.
Thank you for that, Dr. Dango. Where has the time gone? We've almost reached 11 o'clock, and thank you to our panelists for dedicating their time and expertise to drive this crucial conversation. Thank you to you, our delegates, our audience, for your questions. So many of them coming through. Those on contact details, we will be in contact with you directly. Our panelists have graciously said that we can put you in touch with them in that regard, and let's foster that collaboration. But before I wrap up, Gugu, let me turn to you. What's your final comment or message that you want to leave corporates and NPOs with?
Thanks, Sheldon. And the time didn't go very quickly, but I think the thread that for me that's been very clear in this conversation is collaboration. And I think the recognition from the panelists, but also from the comments coming through, is the magnitude and urgency of this pandemic requires collaboration. And it really is around finding the ways to co-create and really support impactful interventions. And from an NBI perspective, we remain committed to facilitating and coordinating and assisting in any way that we can. Thanks, Sheldon. And thank you, fellow panelists as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gugu. Dr. Dango, your final comment to business and NPOs?
I'd just like to refer to the KPMG report of 2015, in which they indicated that South Africa loses 28.4 billion rand annually in lost productivity and time, healthcare, lost earnings, lost revenue, lost tax revenue, and diverted resources. And the report was titled "Too Costly to Ignore: The Economic Impact of GBV in South Africa." The report also highlights that funding GBV prevention and response programs is a strategic investment. So on that note, I'd like to thank Vodacom and all the other private companies for taking this leadership opportunity up and supporting GBV, because it is so critical. NGOs and shelters only receive 40% of their funding from government, and they have to do the rest themselves, in addition to making sure that they are providing a good service. So on that point, I'd like to say thank you to the fellow panelists, to Trialogue, and to you, Sheldon, for inviting us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Dango. And just as I wrap up, thank you to you, our audience, again, for your questions, for your comments as well. Just the final one here from Josiah, saying it's not as much a question, but a comment. As NPOs, we need to be able to spot opportunities for the business, I think meant for corporates there, to merge their core activities with poverty alleviation and bring these to the attention of key decision makers. And you're 100% correct, Josiah, because the key and critical work being done by NPOs on the ground can't be substituted, or replaced, and is often so important in addressing those development issues there. But platforms such as these, thank you to the panelists, for remaining open to being in touch with you. And I think through that way, we're able to have NPOs talk about what's the reality on the ground, understanding their communities like no one else does as well. So thank you so much for that comment there, Josiah. Thank you to everyone for your comments, your questions that have come through, which have really made it a rich conversation and discussion this morning. Just a final reminder that a write-up of the discussion, the webinar, will be shared with you next week, as well as the full recording. I know we had a request for the recording so that it can be shared with people who couldn't make it to attend it live this morning. And that's great. So we'll share that with you. Please share it far and wide. Continue the conversation. Continue the collaboration as well. And then just my final one, if you're still on, please take some time just to complete the survey that'll pop up at the end of this as well. It really does help us structure these and make them more impactful and valuable for you, which is ultimately why we do it. So from me, Sheldon Moraes, and the Trialogue team, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Look out for information on our next webinar, which will be the last Thursday of September next month. Where has the year gone? And we will keep you updated on that. And we look forward to you joining us for that discussion as well. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.